All right, cool. So this is where we left our comp off at, and I wanted to, before I get started, I kicked out a new updated render here. It's going to be version 4, and this new render, I don't have the pose figured out quite yet. With some of the rig is still in progress, so I went in and I just posed the geo, just giving myself a rough idea of where I'm going to have this at. So you can see I just pulled the legs back a little bit. If you look, the leather's like not skinned yet, and the bolts are just kind of floating. So everything's a little janky. But what's cool is I can see that design that we just did, and you can see some of it on the wings, and I'm probably going to have the head rotated a little bit, so he's kind of looking out, and we can kind of see into his eye. There's going to be a update to the model as well that we need to take care of, that we actually did in the rigging. So kind of goes, as I've been saying all along, I'm actually doing this look development for this video as I go. And part of the interesting thing is that I am continuing to add stuff. And so, everybody says to never say something's final, and this is a good example of that. But we added some camera lens pieces to the eye so that it can open, and the shutter can open and close, which will be cool. So anyway, so we've got our new render here. And what I wanted to do in the comp is just experiment a little bit with some motion blur. So I'm going to paste in the node here that already works. This directional blur took a while to kind of get dialed in. So I've got it set to linear, and I found a blur length that I kind of like. I'm just going to drop it in at the end here, and you can immediately see that we get a nice amount of blur on the background, which is pretty cool. If I flip that off and on, it's doing something, it's working. And I'm going to paste it down here on the fog as well, because you can see over in here it's doing some weird stuff. It's going in and it's really kind of jacking up that edge, and I'm seeing a lot of that blue background come through, and I'm not seeing any of that fog come through. So I've already got a roto shape created here, and this roto shape is really tightly hugging the rocks. And so I'm going to go in, and on my fog here, the other thing, I wanted to keep some of that sharpness that's in there, and I wanted to make sure that this edge on the wing is not there. So I've got my roto shape that I made, and I'm blurring it, and I'm going to pump that into the mask of the directional blur. And so if we look at what this is doing, you can see if I flip it off and on now, it's still going to directional blur the actual fog edge right here, so that matches up to my background, but I'm actually ignoring the directional blur in the other areas. So I'll maintain some sharpness in the lines of the fog, which is cool. And then when I lay that over top now, let's look through the LUT down here. You can see it's just able to take care of that and smudge that edge. And keeping this as a roto shape is important because I can actually just readjust it as I need to, which is cool. So that's where we're at. Quick little video at the start of this new chapter. So this following chapter that we're going to be doing, I'm going to, using this current set of renders, I'm going to actually be grabbing some images of rocks and stuff and layering them in on the diffuse pass. Because this is a still, I'm getting away with quite a bit. And so I'm going to lay that in because I didn't get to projecting it in 3D. So just for it needs a little bit more texture than what I've currently got going in the procedurals. And I decided to just keep the outside environment a little nondescript. So I'm going to have some little particles in the air coming through that we'll get to in the comp phase. But generally, we'll start off by loading in the environment and into Photoshop, and we'll go from there. All right, so I'm over in Photoshop, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of different textures that I just snippets of photographs, and I'm bringing those in, and I'm just really trying to lay a base over top of that diffuse pass. You can actually see how simple the diffuse pass is in its current state. And if I was look developing this whole environment, I'd probably be doing this in 3D. But since this environment is really only for this still for right now, and it doesn't really exist for anything except that, I'm actually just going to go in and place all these photographs and just try and add some more detail to this background. The The background is really, it's not that demanding of detail. Because I'm going to potentially have that motion blur and it's already out of focus, it's really important that it has some feeling going across it, but I don't need to have every little edge painted. I can be pretty simple about it and just block some stuff in that looks good. So I brought in my beauty pass there, so you can see I'm flipping that off and on, and now I'm starting, I should have started with this, but I decided to just lay down a tileable texture for the background, and then I'm building some of these other things on top of that. So I found this really nice picture of like ice that's kind of frozen on a mossy rock, and it has the perspective that's pretty close. And so I'm now going in and I'm getting some of that placed around, and then this cliff that I'm placing right now, that texture worked really nice to just block in some additional areas of like cracks and additional rock texture that lays on top of the tiling texture. You can really see how forgiving this is too. It's kind of amazing. It can just really be simple, and it'll help because it's getting blurred so much. And then I separated out some snow because at this stage, I was still not sure if I was going to be adding some snow to the rocks. I messed around with it, and I'm pretty sure if I do, I am going to want to do that in 3D. So I'm going to think about that and see if I really want to go down that road or not. That's really a story decision that I haven't made yet. So I'm starting to get some, you can see that there's snow on some of these rocks I'm placing, but generally speaking, you're not going to see any of that in the actual Nuke script yet. Cool, so we're over in Nuke, and you can see I dropped in that diffuse pass, and I'm just experimenting with how to layer that over top of my raw diffuse that I have in there. And it's kind of nice. You can see how it's already just starting to add a little bit of texture immediately with that motion blur and everything. It's pretty cool. Just you can see that that lichen on that one piece of rock, and generally speaking, it's doing its job already. One thing that I am going to need to do, though, is get the depth pass propagated in. And so you can see here what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out where this depth is coming from. So I'm moving my nodes around, and I'm going to use a shuffle copy node. And you can see I'm connecting the depth from the 1 pipe and placing it into the 2 pipe so that the ZD focus will work. And so I've got this sped up so you can kind of see, but you can see right now I'm actually able to get a really beautiful fall off in the focus of that diffuse pass, or of that additive or that new diffuse color, so that it syncs up with the texture that's already there. You can see now I'm actually going in and just simply adjusting some gamma and color around until it looks good. All right, so I got a work in progress version of the rig, and I was able to get my pose worked out. This is not perfect, and because the rig is going to take a little bit more time, I'm deciding to just move forward with my image. And I got it pretty close. I had to do a little bit of just kind of shoving some vertices around on the leather to get this wrapping around correctly. We only had one side skinned, so the other side I needed to just kind of get in there and sculpt. But generally speaking, the rig got us pretty close. And so when you're following along in the work files, there is going to be this pose version 3 that's going to be referenced in. I had to fix up some UVs, and I also needed to actually get in here and actually you can see the beak got a little screwed up. So I've got a group here and this beak. You can just see I'm having to go in and just manually get that positioned into place. So there's some stuff that was unfortunately needing to be a little work in progress still. And you can also see that we've got a little test render going here. Everything hooked back in good. Got the shaders all reassigned and everything to the rig file, and it's looking pretty nice. So I want to start working on this lighting a little bit more, and I want to mainly get a little bit of this dark area taken care of. And so I have a choice here in my lighting file. I can go in and I can decide to add this light into my main beauty lighting, or I can do it in a new render layer and have full control over it. Depending on the situation you're in, you may do one or the other. I don't really feel like there's a right or wrong answer. You'll have more control if it's in a separate render layer, but if you need to be able to go in and only render one render layer and have that one single beauty pass looking good, that's okay too. So cool. I do want to make sure, I just want to look at my diffuse pass here. And cool. So that piece of leather right here was feeling kind of dark. If I look at my normals pass, you can see everything is facing the right direction and generally is looking pretty good. So I really like having these passes in here to really double check what's going on. The one spot that's feeling kind of weird to me right now is actually that inner piece on the eye. So you can see here, if I look, that's going to be my blue channel on one of the mats. So I do have control over that. But at this angle, it's catching a kind of unfortunate reflection. It'll be kind of cool to have that little shimmer in there, but just maybe not quite so bright. Cool, so let's get this lighting pass set up. So I'm actually just going to grab my bird. And you can see I did keep the old bird in here, so you can have it as a reference. I'm just going to have it hidden via a display layer here called old bird. The only other weird thing is on this beak. This beak I did have to go in and duplicate that out. Because there was something going on with the rig that will need to get sorted in the rig file. So because this is just for my testing scene and it's a still, and as far as animation goes and the rig and all of that is work in progress, it's fine for me to just do this small fix in this file for now. Eventually what I want to have happen is be able to go in and actually have my shaded file match my rig file one-to-one, and until I get those perfectly in line, I'll have some little shortcomings like this. You can see the beak is all lined up now, and the render's looking pretty good, so let's get this render layer set up. So I'm just going to grab my bird group, and again I'm going to grab the whole group for this render layer, just like I was before. We'll just make a brand new render layer, and this one will just be called bird underscore top light. Cool. So in this render layer, to speed things up a little bit, I don't really need GI. I really just want to have this one light that I can add directly in. I can see what GI gets me, but generally I'm feeling like I'm not going to need it, but we'll see in a second. So I'm just going to go to create light. I'm going to create a V-Ray rectangular light, get that snapped in over here. There's the rig. We'll turn off all of our NURBS curves here. And let's get this brought on over. There we go. So something pretty big. Something like maybe, so it catches those highlights on the tail feathers. And I'm just going to get it positioned maybe up in there. And we'll get that camera. And I'm going to actually split this so that I have a perspective camera in one and my regular render cam in the other. And now let's go ahead and make sure that our test resolution is set, and it is. And we'll save our file and we'll launch our IPR. All right, so everything is working, but got one small little problem. My fog is still on, so I'm going to go over to my V-Ray tab, environment, and I am just going to turn off my fog. And there we go. And now I should be able to easily go in and get this light dialed in. So I'm going to turn on, in my rectangular light shape, I'm going to turn on the toggle target. And I'm just going to set that right on that bird there. And I'm just going to bring this around until I really wanted the highlights on the tail feathers. And I'm not really sure what direction I'm going to need that on. So that just caught the wing. And I think the tail might be more in the, nope. So I'm just kind of bringing this around, trying to find that sweet spot where I catch that highlight. So I'm just going to shove this light around a little bit until I can kind of get it in that right spot. So that's closer. Maybe a little more to the... So that's feeling pretty cool. I have to remember what it was looking like. Pull that nuke viewer over here. So that's the lighting. You know, you can feel it definitely feels a little bit dark. This is obviously all crazy blown out. I want to be careful. I don't want to flatten it I really just want to be able to get some of those little highlights back in there. Specifically, I was hoping to get some of those designs to pop out, but we'll have to see if we can get that in there. Such a beautiful, almost feels like a photograph. So let's get that dialed in. Just lowering that intensity down. So I want to have something that I can work with in the comp. You can see here I'm getting a bit more contrast than I was hoping for. You can see up in here it's feeling pretty overexposed on the tips of the wings, and then on the tail getting some, but not quite as much as I had hoped for. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to bring this light further up, and let's just try scaling it up some too. So that's kind of interesting. Let's get that target back on there again. So there's that highlight on the tail that I was hoping for. And get that target on there. So that's getting interesting. And now, because it's so much larger, I need to dial it back down again. It's pretty cool. And so you can see I'm getting a kind of even tone. The design on the tail is popping out a little bit. I can also, I could even have two lights here. So I can duplicate that. I can bring another one over to the side. We can try scaling that one down a little bit, crank its intensity back up too. So what I'm gonna do, I was happy with the light placement on the first light. So my second light here, I'm gonna turn this target back on. I'm going to bring it around, and I'm really just kind of fiddling here. And there's no real rhyme or reason to even explain the complete thought process, because it's really all about just trying to get that desired effect. And sometimes I feel like I don't completely know it's funny as it sounds, me saying it, hearing myself say it, and I don't really know exactly what I'm going for until I see it. And again, I want to compare that to the nukes. So just looking at that and trying to figure out, so I'm getting like a little highlight right there. The tail is coming out nicely here. But this other light, I was hoping to get a little bit more of those designs on the wings. But this is actually pretty nice. We've got a little bit of an accent on the back, accent on the shoulder. The eyebrows and the top of the head are getting really nice highlights. The arm is getting hit really nicely. So I may just want to call this good. And it won't hurt also to, let's just save this image. And I want to turn on IPR. Turn on my GI and see what that gets me. And if it's worth having that on. And now I can set that as A. And this is honestly, this is why I kept it off. Let me restart my IPR just in case, but I had a feeling it would do so little. I'm going to save also. I'm kind of cool with my lights right now. I had a feeling it would do so little that it may not be worth it. So let me get this, let's stop our IPR and get it back rolling again. Cool, so let's turn that back on. And generally, really, it's really not getting that much. And it's going to take quite a bit longer to render. It's probably going to be noisier, all that good stuff. So I am just going to leave it off. Cool, so I'm going to try and get that one last highlight so that I can hit the designs on the wings. There was a second where I hit it and it looked really great. So let me, I'm going to duplicate this light one more time, turn on its target. And I'm just going to roll this light around. I think it was right around in here. And you can kind of look at the wing and see which direction it's facing. So there's actually tools around. You can dig some up, I'm sure. So you can see that's the direction of that normal. It's really facing right up there. So hopefully this will catch a nice highlight there. So let's get our IPR going again. Turn off that Set A button and click our IPR button. Cool, so our IPR is kicked on. And what I want to do to make this a little easier on myself is hide my other two lights again. Now I can really see the contribution of only this light. Maybe I'll turn it up just a little bit. And now I can turn on that target and I can roll this around and see if I can, so there, that light's coming in on the wings. And I really just want that nice highlight to kind of glaze the surface of it so that I want to get that really shiny reflection. Let's bring that intensity down. And maybe if I even bring it a little forward. And now I can open up my outliner and I can turn the other lights back on as well. And I can make sure that they're each doing something that I want. You want to make sure that each light has a specific role to play. You don't just want to keep adding lights. You can get in a bad habit of doing that, just having all of them. So let's see this. I think just errored. You can see I lost the one light and I only have the side light right now. Not sure what's going on there. So let's get all these lights back on. Okay. And let's restart my IPR because that felt a little bit strange to me. And these lights are kind of just penetrating right through. That probably is not the best thing to have going on. So I'm actually going to pull that up and out just a little bit. Because I'm really just being mindful of that, because this is a metal object and I want to be really careful with where those highlights land, and I don't want anything too funky to be happening. And actually, instead of waiting for the IPR, I'm just going to do a regular render here, and I'm going to, because I want to see it all smoothed out, I'm going to set my threshold a little bit lower. And actually, if we look at my bird beauty pass, if you remember, we set our max subdiv to 10. So I am going to do the same override here, max subdiv to 10. That'll help speed things up a little bit. And I'll set my threshold to 0.05. And now we'll save that scene. We'll hit render and we'll let that cook for a second. So it's looking really beautiful. I was able to get those details and the texture that I wanted with these additional lights. And so, yeah, these lights also, because I had to keep them kind of far away, they wouldn't easily work inside this other pass. They'd be floating up above the rocks and all sorts of stuff. And I'd have to light link and do all this stuff that I don't really want to do. So the bird top light render layer instead is a good compromise for me. So I'm going to go ahead and set my threshold to 0.01. My bird beauty, I'm going to set my min shading rate to 50. And I don't need to render my cave, but I do need to render my fog again. Yeah, right. So you can see the fog beauty, I actually have to majorly crank up that min shading rate to get that smoothed out. But it was looking really nice having that so high. And so I've got my bird top light, and that should be good to go. So I'm going to make sure that in my render settings, I have this versioned up, which I do not. There we go. And I'm going to save this file, and then I'm going to do my brand new render. So we'll just go rendering menu, render, batch render, and I will join you back in Nuke. Alrighty, so render finished up, but there was a unfortunate oversight. You can see my new fog pass here. So this is actually my old fog pass, and this is my new. So I had actually forgotten that I decided to adjust the camera a little bit, and I brought in these rocks into the foreground, because actually previously in our environment render, if you look, you can see there's this little hint of rock that's in focus, and I liked that a lot, and so I actually brought some more rocks into the picture. Unfortunately, I only rendered out the bird and fog, so now I need to figure out what to do with my environment pass. So looking at this, I'm quite happy with where the rocks are landing, and how it relates to the composition. So if I look at my render, you can see I've got the bird is all updated, looking pretty awesome. And then the rocks, I'm almost feeling like I'm going to lower this one down a little bit more. It's feeling a little too close to that foot right now. I don't want it to feel like the bird just took off. I want it to feel like it's already in flight. So over here in Maya, you can see I went ahead and I did lower this rock a little bit from where it was. So it'll be a little bit lower on screen. And this render took only 3 minutes. So you can see I've got the min shading rate turned down, and I've actually got my threshold at 0.1. Because I want to make sure this is all working, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to render out the fog pass again. You can see I've got my min shading rate also set to 2 up here, and I'm just going to do it with really low threshold and at full resolution, but at low threshold. So I can see, make sure everything's working okay and that I'm going to be happy with it. And then I'll go ahead and pull the trigger on the larger render. That's going to take multiple hours. So we will meet back in Nuke. Cool, so we're back in Nuke. You can see it's sort of working. So I've versioned this background pass up to version 9. And I have versioned up my fog to version 9. I'm actually going to step my fog back down to version 8. You can see because it's so noisy, it's almost kind of deceptive how much it's actually adding lighting-wise to the scene, because V-Ray is not able to get in and really fine-tune all of that noise. It's actually really interesting. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that big of a difference, at least. You can see there's a little bit of a issue on that rock where I moved it back down, but generally speaking, it's working pretty well. So it's pretty cool. You can see our the one thing that I really want to change here, if we look at this pass now, is going to be this the way our rock is laid in. That texture that I just kind of photoshopped together. I really want to make sure that I have some detail in those foreground rocks. You can definitely see that there's some we're missing out on some nice information in there. So I can go in now and I can update that Photoshop file. Generally at this stage is when I also want to start making some choices about what I want to do in post to this. So first thing first, I want to bring in that second lighting pass. So let's do that. All right, there we go. Cool. So I can make some choices here. So I can actually choose to just add this beauty directly in. I can see what that looks like first. So I'm going to put my viewer down at the bottom here. And you can go in and just say, well, I've already got all of the control up above. And now I can go in and say, well, you know what, maybe I just want this to be gammaed down a little bit. And generally, maybe I only want to add about half of that intensity, so I can dial that down as well. And you have to be really careful with it. You can see it's definitely, because I'm grading it up and everything down here, I can start readjusting this stuff. Because I've got that extra light on top now, I actually felt I was kind of losing some of that darkness that I liked. Cool, and if we just kind of flip this off and on, you can see it really is adding a ton to our image, which is cool. And you can see now that it's in higher quality, we definitely got a nice bit of that design showing up. That was kind of the idea. I wanted to keep it really subtle, just something that you kind of notice, a little small glint. So it's looking pretty cool. I can go into and I can start dialing pieces of this. So if I look at this object here. So this is when things get a little bit tricky. So if I look through my viewer over here, I do have control over my RGB mats. So what I can start doing is I can add some color grading. So what I want to do, let's go back to RGBA. So what I'm feeling, so I'm clear about what I want to do first, is this highlight right here is a little intense to me on this new pass that I just added. I also want to work on that eye. Having that eye like that is also a little bit funky. So let's talk about different ways to do this. First of all, I can go in with my grade node here, and I can just select its mask, and I can say I'm going to use the green channel of RGB bird 001, and I can just immediately start dialing that down. That will work fine. Let me get my viewer sent down to the bottom here. Cool. So you can see though, if I just do that on the whole object, that may not be what I want, because I actually like how this is looking on the other pass. So let's get rid of that, and what I want to do is actually just use a grade node, and I can shuffle in all of my RGB mats into this other, or just use the RGB mats from this other channel here. So I could take this little mask connection, and just so you can see what I'm talking about, I can set that mask to, I had already tested it to make sure it worked, but I can test that, put that RGB bird 001 green, and now I can go in on this side, and you can see I can dial that up and down. And now we can see how that's looking to the piece as a whole. And again, I can start making some choices here of what I want to do. And you do have to be really careful with it. You can see if I darken it down too much, it's not really going to match. So this could be an option situation where I do want to go in and adjust that specific channel. So I can see that in the reflection, it looks like it's more offensive in the specular. So what I can do is I can composite this with some subtraction. So if I create a merge node, I can say my B channel is RGBA and my A channel is going to be specular. And I can set this to minus. And let's look through RGBA. And actually oops, I think I have that switched. So let's set our A to RGBA. And there we go. So this is the result of that render minus the specular. And what I can do is I can color grade the specular. So I can affect only the specular channel here. And I could shuffle this out too if you wanted to see it in RGB space, but I could dial that down. And I can really make sure that that's only affecting the green channel. On that object. And now that I've adjusted that specular, I can actually merge it back in with a simple plus. So I can say plus, and I can do A channel specular. And now I can set this back to RGBA, and you can see my before and after. So that's a technique of subtractive compositing on these multi-channel passes. I'm not actually going in and breaking out all of the passes yet, unless I really feel like I need to. I'm just kind of experimenting right now to see if I can get that to a good spot. So you can see if I flip that off and on now, it's doing some pretty cool stuff. So it is able to go in there and get that dialed down. It's not going in and muting everything because I'm still maintaining the reflection in full. I can actually probably even dial this up a little bit. Something around in there could be pretty nice. So that's feeling pretty nice. Everything's looking pretty cool. I want to start getting some feeling of the light coming in the cave over here, really just affecting everything. So if I look at my image here. So I've got my LUT at the bottom. What this does is if I look before the LUT here, you can see I've got some really nice bright values over in here. So up around 2 or 3. If you were to look online, you can definitely find a lot of really nice plugins. Like there's one called Exponential Glow that can do a lot of what we're about to do. But for the meantime here, I am going to go in and I'm just going to create some glow nodes. And Nuke's Glow is a little bit unfortunate in the way it works by default. So it's just, I don't know, it just really doesn't have a nice fall off. And so if we look at this and I say effect only, and let's set the tolerance to 3. Oh, that's a little 2. So maybe 2. You can see the tolerance of 2 is going to grab those areas that are getting those hot highlights, and it can do the bloom off of that. And you can see if I set this to, if I start changing my size, it'll make it get bigger, which is cool. But what I like to do is, so I've got my size. We'll start with a smaller glow around 10. And I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple times. Let's get this moved over. So we'll do one that's 10. This one will be 20. This one here will be 40. And this one can be 80. And this last one can be 160. And so you get the idea of this exponential glow. And I can dial down the brightness of each of these by about half. So that the main glow that we're going to be looking at is really going to be, so the main glow that will have a core kind of brightness to it. You can see why. So if I add all of these up, I'm going to set those to plus. You can see it's already starting to get a really nice fall off, but because the intensities are all the same, it's still not quite working. So I'll try my brightness at 0.5 on that core one, and then maybe 0.25, and then say 0.15. I'm not going to subtract these completely in half, but I'm just going to be ticking them down as I go. And now you can see it suddenly has this really beautiful fall off, which is what I'm looking for. So especially down in here, it just has this really nice fade to it. And so I didn't want to include any gizmos or anything like that in this setup or in this, these files for you. So I'm not using the ones that I would normally use. But if you go to the website Nukepedia, there's tons of options for this that they automate all of this so you can dial the intensity up and down and all that good stuff. So now I need to put this back on top, and I can set that to be a plus, and I can start getting it dialed in. So this is where you can see it's looking kind of nasty right along that edge there. So maybe I want to dial that back down a little bit. And honestly, because of where that's falling, I may actually want to dial the tolerance down a little bit. Maybe even try 1 on all of these. And now we can just flip that off and on. And what I really want to do is turn down the brightness more on this main core one. Actually, maybe we'll turn that back up a little bit. And so it's not an exact science, just kind of trying to get it working nicely. Kind of interesting. And so now I can do a little bit of a vignette also. This was actually, so one other thing I'm doing here is I'm actually bouncing this into Cineon space and applying the grain and right before the LUT. I actually like the look of the grain in Cineon. I don't know if that's really a normal thing to do, but it has a nicer effect. So right before that, let's go in and just create our radial. And the vignettes like this are something you can definitely find tools for online as well, but I'm just going to kind of walk you through the setup manually in case you are somewhere where you can't download gizmos or whatever it may be. So our radial here, we need to get, so this is actually, I just realized, this says 2K Super 35. So my default full-size format is actually not even set to my working space. So I do want to make sure I always set that in the beginning. That was a mess up. So there's our HD. So I can get this roughly positioned so it's about the correct size for myself here. And I'm going to want to blur this big time. And right off the bat, that can work pretty well for you. If you need a little bit of clamp, so you're not affecting the center too much, you can use a grade node and you can set it to have a white clamp. And you can see with that white clamp, it's going to shove that inner circle to the edges. And then I can even blur that again, maybe even another 500. And now you can see I've got this nice clean area right in the middle, fading off to my areas of vignette. And now what I can do is use just a grade node here. I can connect that mask, and I can gamma this down. So let's actually look through the bottom. And the reason I'm going to use gamma, and I do want to invert that mask. The reason I'm using gamma with this, and let's make sure, there we go. So that's our red channel, not the alpha. So back to what I was saying. The reason I'm using gamma is that I want to make sure the highlights are still poking through on the image. So you can see that bright spot in the rock is going to poke through the vignette, which is nice. But that was kind of you just see it just helps drive the focus here a little bit. Cleans it up really nice. So it's looking pretty cool. So I want to work on the fog a little bit. So what I really want is to accentuate some of these rays that I've got coming through. And I can always paint in some more, again, milking the fact that I'm dealing with a still right now just for the illustration showing this asset. But I really just want to get some more contrast in here. So I'm going to see if what I can pull out with a separate grade node here. And I'm looking in this area right around in here. And so I'm just kind of fiddling with the sliders. And even just that as is, I would be interested to see what happens if I just plop it right over top. It's going to hit the glows a lot more, so I have to be careful with it. And now if I was to dial that way down, it's kind of an interesting effect that just, it does blow out the background quite a bit. But maybe I can look at what I've got here and I can try putting a soft clip on this. And I'm going to put a logarithmic compress, so it has a kind of film type quality to it. And so that will just, even out those values. And I might need to just blur this a tiny bit because it is pretty noisy. And now if I bring this back up again, we can just, so it's kind of interesting. Don't really know if it's being too successful. I can always use a God rays or something like that as well, but I was hoping this would get something just kind of pushing that out a little bit. So it's sort of working, sort of not. And I want to dial down this glow a little bit too. So I still want to be able to see the mountains coming in there. And I can always go in and I can use this brightening grade node here, and I can get a little bit more out of those. And let's see what it does. So it's probably too high. We'll take it back down to 5. And that image is really just kind of shapes back there, so that's kind of nice. This in here bothers me. I think that's an artifact from the glow. So I really may need to, as nice as this could potentially look, I have to be really careful with it because it's not really
not really working as of yet. So I'm going to turn that off for right now. Cool. So moving on, I want to get these rocks taken care of. I'm going to block in some shapes just based off of the fog pass that I've got here, because this is or actually, I lied. So that fog pass is incorrect, and I want to block it in based on this one right here. So I'm going to create a write node for myself, and I'm just going to write out my GI pass so that I have a really clear reference of where that rock that's in focus is at. And you can see I'm putting this just into my comp render folder. So I'm going to say, actually that's a good idea. I did the beauty pass last time. I can just do that again. So there's our beauty pass. And I can just say beauty for Photoshop version 2. And I'm going to kick this out RGBA. And now let's bounce over to Photoshop.
So you can see the process is going to be exactly the same here. I've got it playing back at 400% just so that we can, because you've already seen the process of just laying in these textures. And I'm kind of making myself I'm visually getting a gauge on where those foreground rocks are falling, and I'm turning that layer on and off, and then I'm just going to simply go in, and you can see right here I've duplicated some layers, and I'm going in and bringing them down. And one of those other layers that I had, which is that kind of mossy rock, I just went in and kind of warped it around so it fit that nice edge of that foreground rock that's in focus. But that to me is one of the key parts of this process, is going in and making sure that those edges of the rocks are standing out. So you can see right there, I went in and painted out that darker rock so that I brought that foreground one more into the focus. And now I'm able to go in and just kind of merge that little bridge of rocks over to the cave entrance with the background. And I'm going to save it out, and we'll bounce back into Nuke. And now back on the Nuke side, we can version this up. There we go. And now I want to examine this ZD focus, because I don't think that it's working very well. You can see that my ZD focus right now, the focal point is actually 100. I'm going to set that to 150. Because I know that that's where that focus range was. And now I need to dial where this depth of field is happening. So you can see there's a sharp area, and it just really quickly fades off. And so that's not really what I want here. So I'm going to look at my layer setup. Focal plane. And if I dial this depth of field slider, I can start widening the area that's in focus. And I can flip this so you can see a good chunk of this is all in focus right here. And so if I look at my depth of field now, so that's actually getting pretty accurately represented. Interesting. So that might not be. That's a little worrying, but we'll have to see. Because I don't really think there should be an area of anything in focus right there. So let's double check in Maya what I ended up setting the physical camera to. And that is set to 150.5. So generally speaking, if I have that mimicked, maybe I can get away with a little bit less. Maybe something around in there. And we can just see what this looks like. Oh yeah, so it does just want to shove that into focus, which I really don't like. And maybe if we try 2. So it's really kind of funky, huh? Not really digging that. So that part's sharp, which it generally should be, but maybe too sharp. So maybe we do just need to go a little lower here. That feels a little bit nicer. And now let's dial it. So I think that the issue is that it's reaching its maximum far too quickly. So my size, what if I try that at 5? Cool. So you can see that it is fading up and out of focus fast or slower now, which is good.
So I may need to just have a bigger maximum. So the larger maximum value will always make the depth of field node calculate slower, but it will give me the ability to crank this up a little bit higher and have a gentler fall off up into it. And actually, you know, I kind of liked 5. So we can see what that looks like. And now if we bounce all the way to the bottom, oh, it got really dark. So it's stemming back from, I didn't actually think about this, but my version 1 does not have an alpha, and my version 2 does have an alpha. So just to maintain whatever I had done before, I'm just going to put a shuffle node here. I'm going to set the alpha to black so that we maintain what we had. And now that's looking better. Nice. So you can see there's, you know, it's all that little bits of detail are floating into the right spot. The focus is generally correct. It's looking pretty cool. Just need to get that fog pass figured out. I want to get some lens distortion going on this. So this is actually a pretty long lens. Don't know if I'd really call it a telephoto. But actually we're only at a 60. For some reason I thought I had it a little bit longer than that. So that'll actually change the type of distortion. So really good reference is, let me pull this up here. So there's Photography Life website, and you can see it's talking about the types of distortion. And so for shorter focal lengths, so I may actually put a little bit of barrel distortion. That's generally seen on the wider angle lenses. And then we get pincushion distortion on something like the telephoto lenses. So you can see right here, they're saying 80 to 400, that kind of thing. So yeah, so I think a little bit of barrel distortion will help. When you're dealing with full CG, again, it's, you know, it's like one of those things that can, it can always help to just do little things like that to just give that little bit of extra realism. I could have rendered this with the V-Ray physical camera, but that's kind of, I don't think I really want to go getting into that. So if I create a checker here, and then I create a lens distortion on it, you can see if I pull this way, it's going to start giving us that pincushion distortion. And if I go negative, it'll start giving us that barrel distortion. But you can see if I pull it down negative, so if I just really make it crazy here, it's just going to need to extend those lines outward. So what you can kind of do, and this is, again, this is not, I'm not matching a camera here, I'm just kind of giving a little bit of extra something for the CG. I can actually compensate and pull those corners back out until my edges are pretty good. And you can see if you end up doing too much, you can see there's a wave in the center and then too much on the outside. So I may just have to scale up my image a little bit. So something around in there. And if we just turn that off and on now, you can see when I'm looking at this checker pattern, it's feeling pretty nice. If you don't like that, you can just keep it as the, just purely having that regular distortion right there. You can always go in and put a transform on it, and you can scale that back up until it matches. And you can just dial that up. So right about there is where I'm going to land if I want that amount of distortion. So cool. So let's get this all dropped in. And on my transform now, you can see if I look at my bounding box, I've definitely eaten up into the top. So to get rid of those pixels. So I can move this down a little bit if you want to. Oh, sorry, negative. And I can just keep pulling that down until those pixels on the edge go away. And this is really, I do kind of like just using this to kind of shove them back up. And maybe my transform now can go back up. Something right around in there. It's looking pretty cool. And if I want to, I can look at the distortion. So you can see if how much can I scale this up and down. Cool. So it could also be a better idea to crop instead of scale, because you may get a little bit of softness in your image. In this case, because my CG is so extremely sharp, I'm actually kind of okay with that little bit of softness and artifacting that I'm going to get from the transform, because it's going to give it that soft, having that little bit, you can see, especially if I look right in here, before those bolts and everything are extremely sharp, and then after they just get a little squished down because I'm doing a kind of funky number, a 7% scale. So just something to always be mindful of when you're doing anything like that. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, and I can start experimenting just with a LUT that provides a little bit more of a look, because again, this is just an illustration. So maybe I can grab one of these old Kodak film back. So that's a pretty freaking cool right there. And something to give it a little bit more of a feeling. So that's kind of cool. And I can also break this away. So let me actually get this back to our 1D LUT. So I'm going to break that into a separate thing, so that I still have access to that 1D LUT, and then I also have access to my other one. So you can see that just has a nice amount of contrast going through it. It's getting closer with every mouse click here. So I think it'd be really cool, because we're starting to introduce some hints of snow, because I'm keeping the background pretty abstract and keeping the focus on the bird here. It could be kind of nice just have some subtle particles that are getting hit, or maybe some dust or something, some like cloud element down towards the bottom. And I can start experimenting with that a little bit as well. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to cut this chapter short, and we're going to go and we're going to do all of our final polishing on this asset, and then the final photoshopping in our wrap-up chapter coming up next. So looking forward to it.